Today, we will explore an extraordinary story, one filled with wisdom, inspiration, and deep reflection. A remarkable event took place on a flight to London, where the innocent words of a 5-year-old Muslim child touched the hearts of many passengers. No one could have imagined that a simple conversation would leave such a profound impact. The flight from Istanbul to London began like any other. Passengers from diverse backgrounds and nationalities settled into their seats, preparing for the long journey across continents. Among them was Labiab, a cheerful and curious 5-year-old Muslim boy, traveling with his mother, Amina, a gentle yet dignified woman. They were on their way to visit family in England. Not far from them sat Richard Coleman, a German professor of philosophy, a skeptical academic who had spent years studying various religions but had never found an answer that truly resonated with him. Known for his critical thinking, Richard often questioned the very concept of God and the afterlife. Seated nearby was Sophie Evans, a British journalist returning to London after covering an international conference in Turkey. She was well known for her articles that often criticized religion, prioritizing rationality and scientific reasoning above all else. As the plane took off, passengers settled into their routines, some reading, others dozing off, and many scrolling through their phones. It was an ordinary flight, until an unexpected conversation changed the entire atmosphere. With the innocence typical of a child, Labiab glanced around and noticed Richard deeply engrossed in a thick book titled The Illusion of Faith. Curiously, he asked, "What are you reading, sir?" Richard turned his head, slightly amused by the unexpected question from a child. Smiling faintly, he replied, "This book explains why people believe in God, even though there is no scientific evidence for his existence." Labiab frowned, thinking for a moment before replying with childlike sincerity. "But the evidence is everywhere, the sky, the earth, even our own bodies. Everything proves that God exists." Richard chuckled, dismissing the boy's words lightly. "It's just coincidence," he replied in a professor-like tone. "The universe was formed over a long, natural process, not because of God." Sophie, who had been typing on her laptop, paused and turned her attention to the conversation. Intrigued, she closed her device and began listening. But Labiab wasn't ready to give up. With his eyes sparkling with curiosity, he asked, "If everything is just a coincidence, then why are there rules in this world? Why do day and night follow a pattern? Why does our heart beat without us telling it to? Why can our eyes see colors?" For a moment, Richard was silent. He hadn't expected such profound questions from a child. Amina, Labiab's mother, simply smiled as she listened. She didn't interfere, trusting that sometimes, wisdom comes from the mouth of a child. Other passengers began to take interest. Some listened discreetly, pretending to be occupied, while others openly observed the conversation. Finally, Richard spoke, his tone slightly more serious. "You're just a child. You only repeat what your parents have taught you. You believe in God simply because your family is Muslim, not because you truly understand the answer." But Labiab's innocent smile didn't waver. "No, sir," he answered softly. "I believe because I see the signs every day. And if I repeat my parents' words..." Richard sighed, shaking his head. "I won't be able to answer all your questions now." Sophie chuckled. "This child is smart," she admitted. "But Richard is right. Religion is often just a cultural inheritance. If you were born into another family, you would likely have different beliefs." Labiab looked at Sophie seriously. "Then why do so many people who are born non-Muslim choose to convert to Islam after seeking the truth for themselves? They don't inherit religion, they discover it and accept it." Sophie fell silent. She couldn't deny it. Even in her career, she had interviewed converts, some of whom had once been atheists. She had seen firsthand how people change their beliefs, not out of tradition, but out of conviction. Richard, sensing the shift in the conversation, attempted to redirect it. "But religion often limits our freedom of thought," he argued. We should be able to think for ourselves without being confined by rigid beliefs. Labib nodded thoughtfully. Yes, sir, you're right. But independent thinking must be based on the correct knowledge. If we use flawed knowledge, our conclusions will also be flawed. Richard couldn't argue with that. Something about this child's words felt different, logical, yet deeply profound. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the cabin had changed. Passengers who had initially been minding their own business were now listening intently. Some were quietly reflecting, while others started asking questions of their own. What had started as a simple conversation had now sparked a larger discussion, one that was causing some passengers to question long-held beliefs. Richard, who had initially seen this as nothing more than a casual chat, now realized he was facing a bigger challenge than he had anticipated. How could a 5-year-old child speak with such sharp reasoning? Sophie, who had been planning to finish an article, closed her laptop completely. This was far more interesting than anything she had been working on. A young boy debating the existence of God with a philosophy professor? That wasn't something you saw every day. Across the aisle, David Laurent, a French businessman, was visibly restless. A committed atheist, he had always believed that religion was nothing more than an illusion, something people used to cope with their fear of the unknown. But now, he listened carefully, searching for a way to counter Labib's arguments. Despite becoming the center of attention, Labib remained completely calm. There was no hesitation in his voice, no trace of nervousness. He was simply speaking from the heart. The debate had reached a turning point. Richard took a deep breath and decided to ask the one question that had troubled him for years. All right, Labib. Let me ask you something more serious. If God exists, why is there so much suffering in this world? Why are there wars, hunger, and injustice? The other passengers, who had been nodding along, now leaned in closer. This was the question. The question that made many people doubt the existence of God. Labib paused, deep in thought. Then, in a soft voice, he asked, Sir, do you know what fire is? Richard frowned. Of course. But what does that have to do with anything? Labib tilted his head. Is fire bad? Richard hesitated before answering. It depends. Fire can burn and destroy, but it can also provide warmth and light. Labib smiled. Exactly. Fire can be harmful or beneficial. It depends on how we use it. The same goes for this world. God created life as a place of testing. Suffering exists so we can learn, struggle, and help one another. Without hardships, humans would never grow. Richard exhaled, still unsatisfied. But why does God allow innocent children to starve? They haven't even had a chance to be tested. This time, Labib's expression softened. Sir, you know this world is temporary, right? He asked gently. Richard nodded. Labib's voice remained soft yet unwavering. Then what is more important, living temporarily in this world, or living forever in the afterlife? Richard exhaled slowly. He was beginning to understand where this conversation was headed. God does not see the world the way we do, Labib continued. We see only the present moment, but God sees everything, past, present, and future. Every person who suffers in this world, if they are patient and have faith, will be compensated with something far greater in the afterlife. This world is not the place of ultimate justice. True justice exists after we die. From behind them, an elderly woman named Margaret suddenly spoke up. But I don't believe in life after death. How can you be so sure that heaven and hell exist? Labib turned to her with a warm smile. Auntie, do you sleep every night? He asked politely. Margaret gave a puzzled nod. Yes, of course. And when you sleep, do you dream? She nodded again, slowly starting to see where he was going. Do those dreams feel real? Margaret hesitated, then admitted, Yes, sometimes they feel very real. I can feel sadness, happiness, even fear in a dream. Labib's smile widened. Well, If we can experience another world in our dreams, why can't we experience another world after death? The cabin fell silent. The innocent wisdom of the child left many in deep contemplation. David, who had been silently restraining himself, finally spoke up. But religion also causes war. So many people have been killed in the name of God. If God exists, why does he allow people to fight in his name? This time, Labib turned to him with a more serious expression. Sir, if someone kills in the name of love, does that mean love is bad? David opened his mouth but found no words. Labib continued, and if someone cheats in the name of honesty, does that mean honesty is wrong? David fell completely silent. Labib's voice remained calm. Religion never teaches people to kill without cause. The real problem is not faith, it's human greed. Wars are caused by people who misuse religion, not by religion itself. Several passengers began nodding in agreement. Slowly, they started to realize that it wasn't faith that was at fault, but how people chose to use it. Richard, the once skeptical professor, sat quietly, deep in thought. Sophie, the journalist, felt unsettled. She had always prided herself on being critical of religion, always searching for ways to disprove it. But now, for the first time, she struggled to find a single flaw in Labib's reasoning. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "You are an extraordinary child. I have never thought about life after death in this way before." David clenched his jaw, still trying to hold on to his beliefs, but something inside him had begun to waver. He wanted to dismiss this as mere coincidence, but how could a 5-year-old speak with such depth? Finally, Richard, the strongest opponent of religion on this flight, spoke up. "Labib, you've really made me think. I've never met someone who could answer my questions so clearly, let alone a child." Labib smiled humbly. "I'm not smart, sir. I just read the Quran. The answers are already there." The entire atmosphere in the cabin shifted. Some passengers sat in silent reflection. Some looked confused, and others wiped away tears. But before anyone could continue the discussion, something unexpected happened. The moment the plane began descending toward its destination, a heavy tension filled the air. It wasn't just in people's minds, something felt different. Passengers barely had time to process the conversation when a sudden announcement came over the loudspeaker. "Dear passengers, we are experiencing slight turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts and remain seated until conditions return to normal." The plane shook violently. Some passengers gasped, gripping their armrests. Richard, a seasoned traveler, had experienced turbulence before, but for some reason, this time felt different. Sophie peered out the window and saw thick black clouds rolling in. A heavy storm was forming in the distance. David, the firm atheist, now looked the most restless. His hands clenched the armrests tightly, his eyes fixed ahead, unblinking. Labib, still as calm as ever, turned to him. "Sir, are you okay?" he asked with genuine concern. David swallowed hard. I'm fine. It's just..." He hesitated. "Why does this turbulence feel longer than usual?" Margaret, the elderly woman, closed her eyes. She wasn't sure about her beliefs, but at that moment, instinct took over. She found herself whispering a prayer, seeking protection from something greater. For many on this flight, their journey had only just begun. The small cabin lights flickered for a moment before finally stabilizing again. Then, something unexpected happened. Tension peaked, and fear gripped the cabin. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, her face filled with anxiety as she spoke urgently into the small radio on her shoulder. Soon, the pilot's voice came over the intercom again, but this time, it carried a more serious tone. "Passengers, we are encountering worse weather than expected. Please remain calm. The crew and I are working to find a safer route." Whispers spread through the cabin. Some passengers clutched the hands of their loved ones, others bowed their heads in silent prayer, and a few gripped the backs of their seats with white-knuckled intensity. Richard turned to Labib, his usual skepticism absent. His voice was quieter this time. "Labib, what are you thinking right now?" Labib met his gaze with serene eyes. "I believe that life and death are in the hands of God," he replied. "If He wills for us to be safe, we will be. If not, then our time has come." Richard fell silent, contemplating Labib's words. There was something about his calm demeanor that made the chaos around them feel less overwhelming. David, who had been shifting restlessly in his seat, finally exploded. "You really think God is going to save us? If this plane crashes, it'll be because of natural laws, not because of some divine intervention." Sophie, who had been quiet until now, turned to him. "If you're so sure that God doesn't exist, why do you look more afraid than the rest of us?" David opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His body betrayed his fear. Labib regarded him gently. "There's no need to be afraid," he said. "If you want to know whether God exists, pray. Ask for something. If He answers, then you'll have your answer." David shook his head. "I don't believe in prayer." Labib smiled. "You don't believe in prayer, but you're afraid of dying. That means something inside you still has doubts. Why not try?" David remained silent, torn between logic and an unfamiliar feeling stirring within him. Then, without warning, the plane jolted violently. Passengers screamed. The cabin lights flickered again, and the engine roared with an unsettling sound. Panic surged through the air. Amid the chaos, a small yet steady voice rose above the fear. "O Allah, save us all. Give us a chance to know you better." It was Labib. His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried through the cabin as if every soul had been waiting to hear it. And then, something incredible happened. The violent shaking eased. The plane steadied. The deafening roar of the engine softened. The lights glowed steadily once more. A moment later, the pilot's voice returned, this time filled with relief. "Passengers, we've made it out of the storm. We are back on a safe course. Please remain seated until further instructions." A stunned silence filled the cabin. People exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from disbelief to wonder. Margaret wiped away silent tears. Richard lowered his head, deep in thought. Sophie stared at Labib with newfound admiration. And David, the man who had so vehemently rejected the idea of God, covered his face with both hands. Labib turned to him, his voice gentle. "What do you feel, sir?" David took a deep, trembling breath. I don't know. But I feel like there's something bigger than all of us." Sophie, her voice laced with emotion, finally asked, "Labib, what should we do if we want to know God better?" Labib smiled. "Read the Quran. It's a love letter from Allah to all of us." The cabin fell into a different kind of silence, not one of fear, but of reflection. Hearts that had been closed for so long now seemed to be opening. But this was only the beginning. The passengers' spiritual journey had just begun. As the plane continued its smooth descent, the pilot made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching our destination. Please prepare for landing." The flight had started as an ordinary journey. But for many on board, it had become something far greater, an encounter with faith they never expected. The atmosphere in the cabin had changed. Something deep had shifted in the hearts of many passengers. Margaret turned to Labib with teary eyes. "Son, I never thought that at my age I would meet a little boy who would teach me about God in such a gentle way," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I've lived a long life, but this is the first time I truly feel the desire to know God more deeply." Sophie nodded in agreement. "Me too. All my life, I thought religion was just something passed down, not something you actively seek. But after hearing everything you said, I feel like there's something truly beautiful in Islam, something that brings peace." Richard, who had been skeptical from the start, now looked at Labib differently. "Labib," he admitted, "I always believed in science. Logic, facts, and evidence, that's what I put my faith in. But when the turbulence happened, I felt a fear I've never felt before. And then you prayed, and everything suddenly calmed. Maybe I've been searching for answers in the wrong place all along." David remained silent. The man who had firmly denied God's existence now sat with his head lowered, lost in deep thought. His heart was at war, between acceptance and denial. Labib smiled gently. "Islam is not just about worship, it's about living in peace, knowing that Allah is always with us. If you want to know Him, there's no compulsion. But try reading the Quran with an open heart, you might find the answers you've been searching for." The plane landed smoothly, and passengers who had been gripped with fear now walked through the arrival hall with newfound contemplation. Margaret turned to Richard and David. "I don't know about you, but I want to learn more about Islam. I want to know more about the God who has been so merciful. And I don't want to wait, I want to do it now." Richard glanced at Labib and smiled. "If you don't mind, could you take us to the nearest mosque? I want to see for myself how Muslims worship." Labib's father, who had been silently watching his son with pride, nodded warmly. "Of course, we'd be honored to take you." David sighed heavily, staring at the evening sky as it turned a deep shade of red. He then looked at Labib and spoke softly. "I can't say I believe just yet, but I want to learn. I want to find out for myself if God is truly there." Labib's smile widened. "That's okay, sir. Allah gave us intellect so we can think for ourselves. The most important thing is to seek with an open heart." A few hours later, in a small mosque near the airport, something incredible happened. Passengers who had once been engaged in debate now found themselves on the brink of a new journey. Margaret, Sophie, and Richard stood together, their voices steady as they recited the shahada, embracing Islam with tears of joy streaming down their faces. David, though not ready to take that step yet, sat among them, listening intently. His heart, once filled with doubt, was now open, perhaps for the first time in his life. Labib watched the scene with quiet happiness. Allah had guided them here in His own way. That evening, in a small mosque, a turbulent flight filled with arguments and skepticism had led to something far more beautiful, Allah's guidance touching the hearts of those who sincerely sought the truth. And Labib, a 5-year-old boy, had unknowingly become the means through which they found the light of Islam. This story reminds us that guidance can come from anywhere, even from a child. In the rush of life, we often get so caught up in worldly matters that we forget to search for the true meaning of our existence. But when the heart is open, the truth will find its way. Islam does not force, it invites with love, wisdom, and gentleness. And Allah guides those who sincerely seek Him. For anyone who is hesitant or afraid to seek the truth, just take the first step. Because when you sincerely search for it, Allah will show you the way. Thank you for watching this inspiring story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can benefit from meaningful stories like this. See you in the next story. Welcome, friends. This time, I bring you a story that not only stirs emotions but also challenges logic and conscience. This is not just a tale of differing opinions but a testament to the power of knowledge, intellectual honesty, and the courage to stand up for the truth, even in the midst of a tough and intense debate. In a grand hall in the heart of Berlin, Germany, tension filled the air. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on the main stage, where a cross-disciplinary discussion on religion and philosophy was taking place. This prestigious event had invited world-renowned thinkers, scientists, and intellectuals to debate a sensitive yet significant theme: can science and religion coexist? The spotlight illuminated two prominent figures seated opposite each other. On one side stood Professor Leonard Graham, a legendary atheist philosopher. At 60 years old, he carried an extraordinary reputation in the academic world. Known for his razor-sharp arguments, he had silenced countless debaters and public discussions. His partially white hair and piercing gaze behind his glasses gave him an aura of intellectual dominance. He had earned the title of the argument breaker. On the other side sat a young woman, calm yet exuding authority. Dr. Amina al-Hadid, a 28-year-old Muslim scientist, was a rising star in astrophysics from Cairo. Dressed modestly in a plain white headscarf and a long black coat, she possessed a quiet confidence. Her intelligence shone through her clear, observant eyes. Not only was she an expert in her scientific field, but she was also known for her active participation in discussions about the relationship between science and spirituality at various international forums. Initially, many in the audience underestimated her. How could a young woman challenge the decades of experience held by a renowned philosopher? However, Amina appeared unfazed. As the debate session began, the moderator addressed the audience. Today, we will witness a clash of arguments, rational thought versus spiritual values. Can they work together, or must they remain separate? The moderator gestured toward Leonard. Professor Leonard, you may begin. Leonard smiled slightly as he stood up. Thank you. Science is built upon evidence, not belief. We live in a rational world, and in my view, religion is nothing more than a cultural relic, not a source of absolute truth. While I do not dismiss its moral values, the problem arises when religion attempts to explain the universe. The universe does not require metaphysics. It operates solely on the laws of physics. A round of applause erupted as Leonard confidently took his seat. Now, it was Amina's turn. She rose slowly, her gaze sweeping across the audience. Thank you, Professor. I respect your extensive experience, but let me pose a question. If science is confined to the laws of physics, then where did those laws originate? Did the constants of gravity or the laws of thermodynamics simply exist without reason? The room fell into silence, all eyes on Leonard. The philosopher smirked slightly and replied, These laws exist because the universe operates in that manner. There is no underlying design, it is merely the outcome of natural processes. Amina nodded thoughtfully. I see, Professor. But if everything is merely a coincidence, why does the universe exhibit such remarkable order? Why do the constants of physics align so precisely to permit life? Even a slight variation would make life impossible. Expressions of curiosity appeared on the faces of some audience members. Leonard frowned. Ah, the fine-tuning argument. I have encountered this many times. However, the existence of the universe could simply be a product of chance, or perhaps there are multiple universes, the multiverse theory, which allows for such a scenario. Amina smiled, her gaze unwavering. Professor, the multiverse theory remains speculative and unproven. Meanwhile, the principle of causality, the idea that every effect must have a cause, is a fundamental basis of science. So why is this principle conveniently set aside when discussing the origins of the universe? Soft murmurs spread through the audience. Some participants appeared impressed by Amina's structured reasoning. For the first time, Leonard seemed to be contemplating deeply. He was not accustomed to being challenged with such well-organized arguments. Amina continued, her voice steady. I am not here to impose beliefs, but rather to highlight that science and logic often lead us to the understanding that there is something greater than just matter and energy. My faith as a Muslim does not stem from ignorance of science but from recognizing the harmony between the two. At that moment, the camera focused on Leonard's face. He appeared more serious now, his confident demeanor slightly shifted. He lowered his head momentarily before looking up again. You present an interesting perspective, Dr. Amina, he said softly. The debate was far from over, but something had changed in the atmosphere. The seeds of curiosity had been planted. Before Leonard could continue his argument, a participant from the front row raised his hand. Professor Leonard, may I ask you something? You always say that life is just a coincidence. But if life is truly meaningless, Why do you keep discussing meaning and truth? Applause erupted across the hall. Leonard remained silent for a moment, absorbing the question. Amina watched him without interrupting, allowing the seasoned philosopher the space to reflect. The debate was far from over, but for the first time, the man who had dominated scientific discussion seemed shaken. A deep silence settled over the vast hall as if the entire audience was holding its breath, waiting for Professor Leonard Grayen's response to the simple yet profound question. Leonard took a deep breath. He was no ordinary philosopher. He had engaged in thousands of debates with some of the greatest thinkers and had earned numerous accolades for his ideas. But something in Dr. Amina al-Hadid's words, along with the audience member's question, had unsettled him. It was as if he was being forced to confront himself without filters. Adjusting the edge of his glasses, Leonard glanced at Amina and then at the audience before finally speaking. His voice, usually firm and commanding, now carried a different weight. For over a decade, I have stood on podiums like this, teaching that life is nothing more than a series of biological coincidences, that our existence is the product of a blind, purposeless process. He said, then paused. His gaze softened. But there are moments like this when the logic you have always relied upon suddenly begins to waver. A murmur spread through the audience, yet Amina remained silent. She knew this was not a moment for her to press further, but rather to let her opponent think deeply. Leonard continued, his voice more introspective than before. Dr. Amina, your question about meaning touched on something I have deliberately avoided in all my debates. I have always stayed within the realm of logic and facts, but rarely, perhaps intentionally, I have steered clear of deeper existential questions. Some of the participants shifted uneasily in their seats. No one had expected a philosopher of Leonard's caliber to acknowledge a gap in his argument. Suddenly, a young man from the back row stood up. His voice was filled with curiosity. Professor, does this mean you are beginning to consider the existence of forces beyond the laws of nature? Leonard smiled faintly and shook his head. I'm not saying that. At least, not yet. But I do admit that there are questions that cannot be answered with numbers and formulas alone. He then turned to Amina. And you, Dr. Amina, asked the kind of question that made me think again. Amina responded with a polite nod. It is not my job to make someone believe, Professor. But sometimes, the right question is more powerful than any answer. The forum, which had started as a debate between atheism and theism, had now taken on a different direction. It had become a search for the deeper meaning of existence. Berlin remained as busy as ever. But in a small cafe, far from the city center, the atmosphere was much calmer. Amina sat by the window, a steaming cup of tea beside her, as she reviewed emails on her laptop. The door to the cafe opened, and a tall figure in a gray suit stepped inside. Professor Leonard Grayen. Amina was momentarily surprised but quickly offered a warm smile. Leonard approached her table, looking slightly hesitant but carrying an air of sincerity. May I sit? He asked. Of course, Professor, Amina replied politely. Leonard took a seat, staring at the empty cup in front of him before finally ordering a coffee. A brief silence settled between them until he finally spoke. The debate the other day, it made me think a lot, he admitted softly. I'm not used to that. Amina closed her laptop, giving him her full attention. What made you come here, Professor? Leonard let out a quiet sigh. I read some of your papers, about how you connect science and spirituality. Leonard sighed and leaned back slightly. You know, Amina, I lost my wife 5 years ago to cancer, he admitted, his voice lower, more vulnerable. Since then, I've grown more hardened against the idea of life having any inherent meaning. I see suffering as proof that there's no design, no purpose, just chaos. He fell silent for a moment before continuing. But after that debate, I started to wonder, maybe I've been resisting something not because it isn't true, but because I'm afraid to face it. The atmosphere in the cafe grew heavier. Amina recognized this as a pivotal moment. Professor, she said gently, sometimes loss makes us build walls, not to protect ourselves, but to push away the pain. But the search for true meaning often begins with loss itself. Leonard looked at her, his eyes briefly glistening before he quickly looked away. After a long pause, he finally spoke. I want to learn more about your perspective, he admitted. Not as a debate opponent, but as a seeker. Amina smiled warmly. I'd be happy to share. A follow-up discussion was held, a smaller, more intimate gathering compared to the grand forum before. This time, Leonard and Amina sat side by side, not as rivals, but as two thinkers exploring deeper truths. In the past month, Leonard addressed the audience. I've spent a lot of time questioning things I have long ignored. I won't say my beliefs have completely changed, but I do know one thing for certain. Intellectual arrogance is often the greatest barrier in the search for truth. The audience listened intently. Amina added, sometimes the greatest strength in a dialogue isn't about winning an argument, it's about having the courage to open ourselves to deeper questions. That day, the discussion no longer felt like a battle. It became a space where ideas were shared rather than dismissed. But this story was far from over. A bigger test was yet to come, a crisis that would shake Leonard to his core and force him to make a life-altering decision, a choice between the beliefs he had clung to for decades and something he had only just begun to understand. The rain poured heavily over Berlin, the sky a deep shade of gray, pressing down on the city like an unbearable weight. In a quiet library on the edge of town, Professor Leonard Grayson sat by the window, lost in thought. A book on existential philosophy lay open before him, but he wasn't reading. His mind was elsewhere, on his conversations with Dr. Amina Hadid. Over the past month, their discussions had moved beyond intellectual debates. Amina had not only presented rational arguments, but she had also introduced perspectives that challenged Leonard's fundamental beliefs, especially about the purpose of life and, more importantly, the relationship between humans and their creator. But for Leonard, these were still just concepts. He wasn't ready to let go of the atheistic principles that had defined his worldview for more than 6 decades. Until, one evening, a message came that shattered every defense he had built. His phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a short but urgent text. Dad, I'm in the hospital. Please come quickly. It was from Kara, his only daughter. Without a second thought, Leonard grabbed his coat and rushed out into the storm. Hospitals always carried an air of unease, sterile antiseptic smells, hurried footsteps of doctors, the soft beeping of heart monitors creating an atmosphere thick with tension. Leonard arrived breathless, rushing straight to the emergency room. His eyes fell on Kara, lying on a hospital bed, and Four in her arm. Her face was pale, but she managed a weak smile upon seeing him. Dad? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Leonard gripped her hand tightly. Kara, what happened? A doctor standing beside the bed spoke up. We ran some tests. There's significant internal bleeding. We need to perform surgery immediately. The words hit Leonard like a sledgehammer. His throat tightened, his mind reeled, his world, once so firmly rooted in reason and skepticism, suddenly felt fragile and uncertain. The anxiety pressing on Leonard's chest was unbearable. How bad is it? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The risk is high, but we will do our best, the doctor replied. Leonard nodded stiffly. As soon as the doctor left, he sat beside Kara. You'll be fine, Kara. Dad's here. He forced a faint smile. Dad? Her voice was weak. Did you ever pray? That question hit Leonard harder than anything. He hesitated. Religion had become an avoided topic between them, especially after his wife's passing. He had always feared looking weak in his daughter's eyes. Father, you're not a believer in prayer, are you? Kara took a deep breath. But maybe this time you could try. Leonard felt his chest tighten. He lowered his head, unable to answer. but the hope in Kara's pale face made him waver. That night, outside the operating room, Leonard sat alone. The silence was heavy, interrupted only by the occasional footsteps of passing nurses. He closed his eyes, trying to calm his mind, but Clara's face kept appearing in his thoughts. Not knowing what else to do, he pulled out his phone and typed a message. Kara is in the hospital. Emergency surgery. I don't know what to do. The message was sent. It didn't take long before his phone vibrated with a reply. I'll come. An hour later, Amina appeared in the hospital corridor, her long coat still damp from the rain. She saw Leonard sitting in deep thought and approached him. What did the doctor say? She asked, taking a seat beside him. The risk is great. I'm afraid of losing her, Leonard admitted, his voice breaking. Amina looked at him gently. Leonard, there are times when logic is no longer enough. And sometimes it is precisely in those moments that we are most honest with ourselves. Leonard lowered his head, his fingers interlocked tightly. I don't know how to pray. Amina gave him a small, understanding smile. Prayer isn't about beautiful words. Sometimes it's simply the sincerity of the heart, an acknowledgement that we are weak and in need of help. Leonard remained silent for a long time. Then, slowly, he closed his eyes. He didn't utter any grand sentences, just a soft whisper in his heart. If there is something out there, whoever you are, save Kara. It was simple. But for Leonard, it was a confession more profound than any intellectual argument he had ever encountered. A few hours later, the operating room doors finally opened. A doctor emerged, removing his surgical mask. The surgery went well. Kara is stable. Leonard's knees nearly gave out. He would have collapsed if Amina hadn't been there to support him. The tears he had been holding back finally spilled over, and for once, he didn't care. He didn't know whether Kara's survival was due to medical expertise or something beyond his understanding, but in his heart, he felt an emptiness being filled with something new, something he couldn't yet define. In the following days, Kara slowly recovered. One afternoon, as she regained enough strength to sit outside, Leonard pushed her wheelchair through the hospital garden, both of them enjoying the warmth of the sun. Dad, Kara said suddenly, when I was in the operating room, I felt you praying for me. Leonard smiled faintly. Maybe I did. Kara looked up at him with a knowing expression. That's enough for me. Her words lingered in Leonard's mind. He wasn't ready to admit it aloud, but deep inside, there was a newfound sense of peace he had never experienced before. 1 month later, the final forum. Leonard stood once again at the scientific forum, not to debate, but to share his journey. For years, I believed that the answers to life's biggest questions were found in books and data. But one moment in a hospital changed everything. I'm not here to say I've suddenly abandoned all my beliefs, but I've learned that there are questions logic alone cannot answer. He glanced at Amina in the audience. Sometimes, the greatest strength is not in our minds, but in the honesty of our hearts, when we are truly helpless. The room fell silent as the audience absorbed his words. But this story is not over. Leonard is still on the verge of the greatest quest of his life. His journey has just begun. Spring had finally arrived in Berlin. Cherry blossom trees bloomed, painting the city streets with soft pink hues. But for Professor Leonard Graham, this spring was not just about nature coming back to life. It was about his own transformation, about discovering a new meaning in life. Since the night in the hospital when his daughter, Clara, had been on the brink of death, something had changed within him. He could no longer ignore the strange feeling lingering in his heart, an emptiness he had always masked with logic and scientific reasoning. But now, that emptiness demanded deeper answers, ones that could not be confined to theory alone. One morning, Leonard invited Dr. Amina El-Hadi to meet him in a city park. They sat on a long wooden bench beneath a cherry tree, sipping warm coffee. All my life, Leonard began, I believed that science could explain everything. But when Clara was in that operating room, I realized there are things beyond human control. And for the first time, I felt truly afraid. Amina smiled gently. Uncertainty is not a weakness, Leonard. It is the space where humans begin to search for meaning. Sometimes it is in the darkest moments that we find the light. Leonard lowered his head, contemplating her words. I feel like I've been building a wall between myself and something greater. I've been afraid to admit it. There's no shame in that, Amina said calmly. A spiritual journey is not about who gets there the fastest, but about who dares to begin. They sat in silence, letting the spring breeze carry fallen cherry blossoms around them. In the days that followed, Leonard began reading books he had once dismissed as myths, but this time, he approached them with an open heart. He and Amina continued their discussions, not as debates, but as explorations. They spoke about existence, the purpose of life, and the relationship between humanity and its creator. Leonard found himself gazing at the night sky differently. No longer was he merely observing the stars with scientific curiosity. Now, he was trying to grasp the vastness of something greater, something hidden within the order of the universe. But his journey was not without struggle. Some nights, he doubted himself, feeling caught between the logical foundation he had built his life upon and the quiet voice urging him to look deeper. One evening, Leonard sat in his office, surrounded by books. He closed the one he had been reading and let out a deep breath. If I've spent my life searching for the truth, he murmured, then maybe it's time I stop hiding behind logic and start listening to my heart. A few days later, Amina invited him to a small mosque on the outskirts of the city. Leonard felt out of place at first, but as he stepped inside, a strange sense of tranquility washed over him. The soft recitation of the Quran echoed through the prayer hall, filling the space with an indescribable peace. He sat in silence, listening to the words, allowing them to sink into his heart. Amina sat beside him but gave him the space he needed to reflect. After a long moment, Leonard opened his eyes. I'm ready, he said softly, his voice steady yet full of emotion. With Amina and a few members of the mosque as witnesses, Leonard recited the shahada, the declaration of faith. There were no grand celebrations, no applause, only a meaningful silence that carried the weight of his decision. From the corner of the room, Clara, who had secretly come to witness the moment, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. She embraced her father tightly. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. Leonard, overwhelmed, held back his own tears. I'm proud too, he said softly, because you never gave up on me. The story of Professor Leonard Graham is a reminder that the search for the meaning of life knows no age or boundaries. It proves that even the most rigid minds, deeply rooted in logic and science, can find the light, if only they open their hearts. Leonard's journey was never about winning or losing a debate. It was about the courage to acknowledge human limitations and embrace the possibility of something greater. He teaches us that true greatness is not measured by how much we know, but by how sincerely we seek the truth. Sometimes, we must face loss, fear, or even the deepest emptiness before we can finally understand that there is a greater power guiding our steps. And in that search, it is never too late to find the truth. Sometimes, humans must endure the darkest moments before they find the true light. The story of Professor Leonard Graham reminds us that knowledge and faith are not enemies, but two bridges that, when combined, lead to a deeper understanding of life. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories that touch the heart and mind. See you in the next story. Welcome to a story filled with deep emotions, powerful lessons, and life-changing moments. This time, we will witness an extraordinary encounter, one that brings together an arrogant nun, a humble young Hafiz, and a debate that will alter their lives forever. This story is not just about winning or losing an argument. It is about how sincerity and true knowledge can transform perspectives and open a heart that was once locked tightly shut. In a quiet town in Europe, where life moves slowly and peacefully, there exists a highly respected educational institution. This institution has upheld a tradition of knowledge for hundreds of years, offering teachings in various disciplines. However, one field is given special emphasis: intellectual debate. Within this institution, there is a nun named Sister Maria. She is known for her remarkable intelligence, authoritative presence, and unwavering commitment to her religious principles. Sister Maria is a distinguished scholar, frequently invited to deliver lectures on philosophy, theology, and science. Her brilliance is widely acknowledged, making her the center of attention in every discussion she engages in. Despite the deep respect she commands, there is something about Sister Maria that makes people uneasy. She is notorious for her arrogance, believing that her views are the ultimate truth and that no one surpasses her in knowledge. Having engaged in countless debates with renowned intellectuals, she has emerged victorious time and time again. However, she never imagined that one day, she would meet someone who could rival her intellect, someone extraordinary yet incredibly humble. This person is Yusuf, a young man raised far from the dazzling world of elite academia. Yet there is something exceptional about him. Yusuf is a Hafiz, a young scholar who has memorized the entire Quran with immense sincerity. But it is not merely his memorization that makes him special, it is his profound understanding of Islam's teachings, instilled in him from childhood, that enables him to speak with wisdom in every discussion. One day, a grand debate is scheduled at the institution. The topic is one of great significance. Can science and religion coexist, or are they inherently contradictory? This is an issue of particular importance to Sister Maria, who firmly believes that science and religion must remain separate. To her, scientific knowledge is the key to answering all of life's great mysteries. Confident in her stance, she meticulously prepares her arguments, determined to prove her point. On the other hand, Yusuf, known for his simplicity and sincerity, accepts the invitation to participate in the debate without any sense of burden. His only intention is to share the knowledge and truth he holds dear. The morning of the debate arrives, and tension fills the grand hall of the institution. Scholars, scientists, and intellectuals from all over the world have gathered, eager to witness this profound discussion. The atmosphere buzzes with anticipation. Everyone is waiting to see who will emerge victorious. Sister Maria steps forward with confidence, her white nun's robe a symbol of purity and dignity. Her expression is serious, yet there is a subtle smirk at the corner of her lips, reflecting her self-assurance. Science is the light that guides humanity out of the darkness of ignorance, she declares firmly, her voice resonating throughout the hall. Religion, she continues, offers nothing but false comfort, without clear evidence. We cannot base our lives on unseen and unverifiable beliefs. Sister Maria then begins her detailed explanation, presenting scientific theories that support her argument, that scientific knowledge alone has propelled humanity forward. Sister Maria continued her explanation, covering everything from physics to biology, constructing arguments that seemed difficult to refute. Every word she spoke carried conviction, and the audience was captivated by her intelligence. Her confidence radiated throughout the room as she passionately articulated her stance. However, when it was Yusuf's turn, the atmosphere shifted. The once intense and rigid environment softened into a quiet, contemplative stillness. Yusuf stepped forward with steady steps, his presence unassuming yet firm. He wore simple clothes, nothing that drew attention, yet there was something about him, an aura of humility and wisdom that commanded respect. He carried no notes, no grand presentation, only a heart full of sincerity. Sister Maria glanced at him and spoke, her voice still firm but laced with curiosity. Go ahead. Yusuf nodded, his voice calm yet strong. I respect the knowledge you have shared, Sister Maria. And I also respect the vast achievements of human science. But I acknowledge a knowledge beyond measurement, something science cannot quantify. That knowledge is faith. He then began to explain his perspective on the relationship between science and religion. Science provides us with the tools to understand the physical world, he said, his tone steady. But religion teaches us about the purpose of life, morality, and our relationship with our Creator. These two are not enemies. They complement each other, just like the brain and the heart. Both play crucial roles in our existence. A hushed silence spread across the audience. Though Yusuf's argument lacked the intricate complexities of Sister Maria's scientific discourse, his words carried a different kind of weight, one that resonated deeply within the hearts of those listening. Many found themselves unexpectedly moved, as if his words unlocked something within them. Sister Maria, however, was not one to yield so easily. A smirk played at the corner of her lips as she crossed her arms. "That is merely personal belief," she countered, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Without concrete evidence, all of this is nothing more than a fantasy." Yusuf turned to her with a calm and peaceful gaze. "Isn't science itself a search for truth, Sister Maria?" he asked. "We may not be able to see God with our physical eyes, but does that mean He does not exist? Just like we cannot see the wind, yet we can feel it." For the first time, Sister Maria was silent. She had never considered such a perspective before. All her life, she had focused solely on what could be observed, measured, and proven. But Yusuf's words struck a chord, awakening something within her that she could not explain, an understanding beyond logic, beyond formulas. For the first time in years, she felt unsettled. A feeling she did not know how to describe arose in her heart. This debate was no longer just about science. It was about something much greater, something deeper than she had ever allowed herself to explore. As the discussion progressed, the atmosphere grew more intense, yet Yusuf remained composed. With wisdom, he quoted verses from the Quran, linking them to scientific discoveries, demonstrating how the two were not at odds but instead harmonized. Every word he spoke carried a sense of peace, and the audience found themselves captivated, not just by his knowledge, but by his humility. Sister Maria, however, clung to her beliefs. Though she felt challenged, even shaken, her pride and years of intellectual dominance made it difficult to accept any possibility of being wrong. She felt threatened, but also confused. A battle raged within her. Would she continue holding on to the beliefs she had always defended? Or would she open her heart to a greater truth? The debate continued, but something had shifted. Yusuf's calm demeanor, his sincere words, and the depth of his understanding had left an imprint on the audience. The room was no longer filled with the tension of a competition, but rather, with contemplation. Sister Maria stood at the podium, her arms crossed tightly. Her face, once full of confidence, had paled slightly. Doubt flickered in her heart, a new and unfamiliar sensation she could not ignore. She felt as if something was missing, something beyond the reach of logic and reason. But pride is a difficult wall to break. As a well-known nun, as an intellectual who had built her reputation upon her unwavering stance, the thought of admitting she was wrong felt like destroying everything she had worked for. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "We cannot live by relying on something." Her voice wavered slightly. The battle within her had only just begun. Sister Maria straightened her posture, determined to regain her confidence. "We cannot base our lives on something that cannot be clearly proven," she asserted, though there was a hint of hesitation in her voice. "Belief is important, but without tangible evidence, it leads only to dogma and uncertainty. Science is the key to unlocking the mysteries of life." Her words were firm, yet deep inside, doubts were beginning to creep in. Had she truly believed, all these years, that science alone was enough? Could logic and evidence explain everything in life? Yusuf's arguments were not just challenging her intellectual stance. They were stirring something much deeper within her, something she had never allowed herself to question before. Throughout the debate, Sister Maria felt an unfamiliar weight pressing on her heart, a resistance she couldn't quite put into words. It was as if there was an invisible barrier keeping her from accepting an entirely new perspective. And yet she stood tall, refusing to yield, her pride preventing her from showing any weakness. But Yusuf remained calm. He met her defiant gaze with unwavering serenity. "If everything must be proven," he asked gently, "then what about love?" The room fell silent. "We cannot measure love with a microscope. We cannot weigh it on a scale. Yet, does that mean love does not exist?" His words struck her like a thunderclap. "And what about your own faith, Sister Maria? You may not see God with your eyes, but does that mean He is not there?" The question hit her harder than she expected. It was something she had never truly considered. All her life, she had relied on what could be tested, seen, and verified. But now, for the first time, she was confronted with the possibility that there were truths beyond human perception, truths that could only be understood with the heart. This debate was no longer just about science and religion. It had become a deeply personal reckoning, a search for meaning beyond the limits of logic and theory. Yet pride and fear still held her back. She clenched her fists, refusing to yield. "No," she said, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "That is just belief. It cannot be tested. Science is the only way to understand the world." But her certainty was slipping. The audience noticed it too. The once unshakable Sister Maria, known for her confidence and conviction, now wavered. She tried to maintain her composure, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes, something none of them had ever seen before. Yusuf continued, his tone gentle yet firm. "Sister Maria, we cannot judge reality only by what we see. We must open our hearts to truths that may not always be explained by words or formulas. God is not confined to books or scientific theories. He is present in every sincere soul, in every act of kindness, in every breath of life." As he spoke, there was something undeniably peaceful about him. His eyes shone with sincerity, and his voice carried a calmness that resonated deep within those who listened. Every word seemed to penetrate straight into the hearts of those present. Sister Maria felt something shift inside her. For the first time, she was in the presence of something greater than herself, something she had never allowed herself to consider before. And yet a part of her also felt threatened. She had always believed herself to be the guardian of truth, the one who upheld knowledge as the ultimate foundation of life. But now, she was beginning to doubt whether the knowledge she had relied on for so long could truly provide answers to every question. Her face changed. Frustration tightened around her heart. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. Why? Why did Yusuf's words shake her so much? Hadn't she always been certain that science held the answers? Why, then, did the words of this simple young man make her feel as if the very foundation of her world was beginning to crumble? A wave of unease washed over her. It was no longer about winning or losing the debate. It was about herself. About her beliefs. About the very thing she had devoted her life to. And for the first time, Sister Maria asked herself, what am I truly searching for? And can science alone really answer all the questions of life? But that emptiness is not a loss, it is an invitation. An invitation to seek something deeper, something beyond what we can measure or calculate. Sister Maria sat in silence, her mind racing. How had this debate taken such a turn? She had entered the discussion confident, certain that she held all the answers. But now, for the first time, she was beginning to question whether the world was truly as simple as she had always believed. Yusuf's words echoed in her heart. Had she spent her entire life limiting herself? Had she locked herself in a world where only logic and proof were allowed, shutting out anything that couldn't fit into a scientific formula? A lump formed in her throat. Was she wrong? No. She couldn't be. She straightened her back, gripping the edges of the podium as if it were the only thing holding her together. I will not let myself be influenced by words without scientific basis. she declared, forcing strength into her voice. Science does not require faith. We must remain grounded in what we can prove. But even as she said it, a part of her felt the weight of those words, like chains she had unknowingly bound herself with. Yusuf remained composed. He did not press her, nor did he argue with force. Instead, he simply smiled and spoke with the same calm sincerity that had been unsettling her from the very beginning. Sister Maria, he said, I am not here to force you to change your view. I only ask you to consider the possibility that science and faith are not enemies. They are two paths that can walk side by side, complementing each other to help us understand the world better. Because true knowledge is not just about gathering facts, it's about how we apply wisdom with sincerity and humility. His words lingered in the air, soft yet powerful. Maria felt something shift deep inside her. Fear, uncertainty, and something she didn't want to name, something dangerously close to hope. Could it be? Had she been blind to a truth greater than the one she had always defended? Had she been so determined to be right that she had ignored the possibility that there was more to life than just what could be seen and tested? The weight of years of certainty pressed down on her. If she allowed herself to even entertain the idea that she had been mistaken, it would mean unraveling everything she had built, everything she had stood for. It would mean facing a world she had never dared to explore. But in the farthest corner of her heart, a tiny flicker of light had begun to glow. For the first time, she wasn't just arguing to win. She was searching. And she was afraid. The room was filled with a heavy silence. The audience, once engaged in an intellectual debate, now found themselves drawn into something much deeper. This was no longer about proving a point. This was about the meaning of life itself. Yusuf saw the battle waging in Maria's heart, and he did not push her. Instead, he spoke again, his voice gentle yet unwavering. I know this is not easy, he said. Especially after spending years holding on to what you believed was the ultimate truth. But life is not just about what we can see and touch. There are realities beyond numbers and formulas. Love, hope, faith, these are real. We cannot measure them with scientific tools, yet they shape our lives in the deepest ways. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She lowered her head. His words were breaking through the walls she had spent a lifetime building. Was it possible? Was it possible that she had been ignoring something essential? Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely a whisper. I don't know anymore. It was the smallest admission. But it was also the most honest thing she had ever said. All this time, I was so sure, she murmured. I believed that science was the only way to find the truth. But why do I feel so empty? Why do I feel like there's something missing, something I can't explain? Yusuf's expression softened. Because when the heart begins to open, he said, it first feels empty. But that emptiness is not a loss. It is an invitation. Maria stared at him. For the first time in her life, she didn't have an answer. Because we only see part of the truth, we often feel lost, searching for the missing piece of ourselves, the part that truly connects to God. Yusuf's words struck something deep within him, as if a crack had formed in the wall he had built around his heart. He felt confused, yet somehow blessed by that confusion. Perhaps this was the start of something greater, something beyond logic, something he could only feel with his heart. Suddenly, his eyes welled up with tears. A deep, indescribable emotion flooded his chest, overwhelming him. Tears slipped down his cheeks, carrying with them a mixture of relief, uncertainty, and hope. With a trembling voice, he whispered, Yusuf, I think I'm starting to understand. All this time, I've focused only on what I can see and measure. I forgot that some things can't be quantified by reason alone, but they can be felt with the heart. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I've closed my eyes to a reality far greater than science. And now, I realize how empty I've been without it. Yusuf stepped forward and placed a comforting hand on Sister Maria's shoulder. His voice was calm, yet full of conviction. That's how it often begins, Sister Maria. When we open our hearts, we see the world through a new lens, one that isn't bound by theories or numbers. God is in every step we take, in every act of kindness, in every moment of gratitude. Maria looked up at him, and for the first time, her eyes reflected something she had never felt before: relief. It was as if a door had just opened, revealing a world filled with hope, love, and immeasurable beauty. A world not confined to what she could see, but one she could feel deep within her soul. Her voice, now steady with newfound determination, broke the silence. I want to learn more. I want to understand what truly matters in life. I want to open my heart to something greater than knowledge alone. Yusuf smiled, his expression warm. That's the first step, Sister Maria. Don't be afraid to seek the truth, even if it means breaking down the walls you've built. Life isn't just about knowing, it's about feeling, experiencing, and sharing goodness with others. The audience, who had initially come for a debate, now sat in silent awe. They weren't just witnessing an argument, they were witnessing a transformation. This was no longer about proving who was right or wrong. It was about opening hearts and minds to a broader truth. Sister Maria, who had once been so sure of her views, now saw the world differently. She felt God's presence in every breath, every second, every step she took. Tears filled her eyes once more, not from doubt, but from a newfound understanding. She turned to Yusuf and whispered, "Thank you. You've opened my eyes to a world I never thought to look at. I don't know how to repay you, but I promise, I will keep searching. I will keep learning." Yusuf's response was simple yet profound. "I didn't show you anything you weren't already capable of seeing. The path is yours to walk. But remember, this journey isn't always easy. There will be moments of confusion, times when you stumble. But never stop seeking, and never stop believing, because God is always with us." At that moment, Sister Maria felt an immense weight lift from her soul. She no longer felt the need to defend her past beliefs or prove herself. Instead, she felt free, free to search, free to question, free to embrace a truth beyond what she had ever known. The debate did not end with a victor or a defeated opponent. It ended with transformation. Sister Maria was no longer afraid of different perspectives, and Yusuf had done more than win an argument. He had unlocked a heart filled with wisdom and understanding. The true lesson of this moment was clear. Life isn't about proving who is right or wrong, but about learning from one another. Science and faith don't have to be in conflict. They can coexist, guiding us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves, of God, and of the universe around us. We are all on the same journey, searching for truth, seeking meaning, longing for peace. And above all, we must always remember, the path to true understanding begins with an open heart, one that is willing to embrace love, faith, and hope. With tears streaming down her face, Sister Maria felt a profound shift within her. This moment, this realization, it made life feel fuller, richer, and more meaningful. Her journey was far from over. But for the first time, she knew she was walking in the right direction, toward light, toward truth, and toward a happiness she had never known before.